Arc 6, The Corridor of Memories. Chapter 71, Count 1. With his final words washed away by the wind, Natsuki Subaru's consciousness came to an end. Speaking of irony, ironically enough, his death this time had been a death by his own volition. Perhaps that is why his mind and heart had remained calm at the moment of death. Of course, that had not been the case. He had possessed uneasiness and nervousness for jumping into the circumstance of death on his own accord. However, unlike till now, he had faced the death he had anticipated with much more sincerity than his other deaths up to this time. Of course, he did not believe that in choosing to die had truly saved Shala. She did not want to kill him, so she wanted him to command her to die. Shala, who had been concerned about Subaru to that extent, had let Subaru throw himself to his death right in front of her eyes. The weight of that impact he did not know, and it must have immensely shattered her heart, which had continued awaiting for 400 years. That is why, this was nothing more than Subaru's self-satisfaction. The worst kind of self-satisfaction of exaggerating and not seeing the result for himself with his own eyes. However, Subaru, so what? If all that is fastened to him was nothing but self-satisfaction, nothing but hypocrisy, what was wrong with that? In the end, the method to catch and halt the impact of all happenings in this world could only be wielded in one's own weighing scales. Unaccomplished good deeds hold no meaning, and the word known as hypocrisy doesn't ultimately exist. All of them, surviving. After his discussion with Shala, Subaru cemented the final objective he had touted. No, to be precise, the survival of all of them had been his goal from the beginning. That judgment had merely decided whether to include Shala in that or not, and Subaru chose to love all of them. He shall lead the way to solve all of the catastrophes surrounding this sand tower. For that purpose, he would do anything he could. That is, Subaru, the meaning behind why I am myself. Isn't he that so, Natsuki Subaru? Along with that instantaneous decision, he awakened from the deep, deep abyss of death. Subaru, are you certain of what you said earlier? Subaru, yeah, don't be doubtful after coming this far. It's the information I collected after meeting it face to face and everything. If it couldn't be made the best use out of, I wouldn't bring it up. Harshly replying to the sideward face of the good-looking man running at an average speed, Subaru dashed while pulling the tiny palm. Running past the fourth layer's aisle, they aimed for the second layer of Electra loaded with frustration. As Subaru sprinted whilst pulling Beatrice's hand, Julius' yellow eyes glanced sideways at him. Julius, Subaru, your paleness has not gotten any better. So indeed, the happening in the book was... Subaru, I'm not hiding how worried I am. Don't even try telling me I should have quietly caved into the green room, you. Julius, I would recommend you to stay calm here if it weren't for this situation, but unfortunately things are quite bustling. Right now, we must use anything we can, even if they are mere grains of sand. Subaru, you've got nothing to say, so you'll call me using grains of sand, eh? Julius, they can be thrown if the wind is meager enough. If possible, when in a position capable of reaching the opponent's eyes. Narrowing his eyes at the elegant eloquency, Subaru thought of his words about being thrown into the wind to be ironic. The truth is, in terms of experience, Subaru's death just a few minutes ago had been one of being thrown into the wind. Julius comparing Subaru's existence to grains of sand was not necessarily a mistake either. Subaru, but grains of sand have their own qualities. Beatrice, on top of that, those grains of sand have Betty with them, I suppose. In other words, they are grains of sand with the cutest companion, in fact. Subaru, what, I guess you're talking about the sand that got into your shoes. Beatrice, that's not what that means, I suppose. Smiling at Beatrice, who puffed her cheeks, Subaru pulled her body by directing strength into his arm. Beatrice let out a shriek saying wah hook, and her light frame tightly fit into Subaru's chest. Running while pulling her hand was something quite romantic, but right now he wanted to prioritize speed. Fortunately, Beatrice's body was light like an angel's feather, so carrying her and running was an easy win as well. Subaru, well, I haven't ever carried an angel's feather, though. Julius, about time, idle talk ends here. Subaru, I do believe it is annoying, but... Subaru, yeah, it's annoying. Though I can't come up with words telling you to relax even if I rip my mouth apart, but... It is absolute that that guy Reed and Gluttony will come in contact. We have to go to hold that off. Halting his legs, Julius asked while gazing at the humongous stairway that led to the second layer which lay ahead of them. Interrupting that inquiry, Subaru affirmed that he possessed confidence in it. It was inconceivable for that to be untrue. After all, this was something he had heard from Julius himself. And, if they could obstruct this... Subaru, we can put out a safe against Reed messing everything up. Julius, at any rate, it would be better if his trespassing can be avoided in this chaos. Even if it is just for confirming his movements, it is well worth it to make our way here. Positioning his legs ahead of the humongous stairway, Julius nodded at Subaru. Returning a nod to that Subaru, whilst keeping Beatrice in his grasp, stepped onto the final level of the stairway. And Subaru, gug. Beatrice, Subaru, your condition really is bad, in fact. The book's effect is visible, I suppose. Beatrice looked at Subaru, who had shaken his head violently for a single moment and touched his cheek out of anxiety. Whilst gaining tranquility from the warmth of that small palm, Subaru shook his head, saying I'm fine. Subaru, exhaustion from reading did not lower my wisdom. On top of that, it's just as what I told Julius. This is no time to stay in bed. This is the time when everyone should put their strength together. Beatrice, when about to really reach the limit, absolutely tell Betty, in fact. Subaru, yeah, I know. Responding to Beatrice, who was pressurizing him based on her senses, Subaru took in a long, deep breath. His body felt sluggish. His head felt heavy. His nausea was increasing without pause, and he felt congestion in his blood vessels as if in place of blood, coal tar had been poured into them. All of this was the result of Subaru taking over Ram's inferior physical form through Sior Leonis. What he had harvested was the aftermath of having strode across returned by death and the continuation of Sior Leonis. Equal to his uneasiness by the memories of death, what he carried over by the authority. Thanks to that, he was able to grasp on the positions of his comrades at the current moment. Everyone was abiding by Subaru's instructions and had started to respond to each of the respective attacks. Within those responses of his comrades also existed Meili, in the balcony, and Shala, struggling fiercely. She was certainly there and fighting for Subaru, and the others know, for Subaru's sake. Subaru, I will definitely help you. Whispering behind him, Subaru followed Julius back, who had gone ahead of him. The humongous stairway, which cleared over the first layer of the tower and went through the layer above that, was lengthy. But neither was this the time to spit up complaints nor the situation to leak whining. His entire body was sore, his bones had been shattered to pieces, but they were a necessary compensation to break out of this situation. And Julius, Subaru, let's advance. Julius' dignified voice resounded, and Subaru raised his face whilst running out of breath. And Julius, who had reached the utmost step, turned half of his body back and gestured to Subaru with his hand. Abiding by that, the moment he galloped over the stairway, he was met with the space that had opened up. The complete opposite arrangement of rooms from the fourth layer, which had multiple rooms dividing the floor like a spherical wineglass that had been shattered. The second layer, Electra, which divided all of their worth of existence by the trial, is where they had arrived. And, in Electra, where the three of Subaru, Beatrice and Julius had arrived, the first-generation Sword Saint Reed and the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony were. Reed, hey, you. Is that all you got, you? It ain't a joke, you. Didn't you come here to entertain me, you? It's like kin, you. Don't you be making me laugh, you. No, at least be making me laugh, you know, you. It ain't amusing or anything, you. They came across the scene where the Sword Saint Reed Estria went on and on complaining, having grabbed a single leg of the young boy that had been mercilessly struck down onto the floor. Julius, this is. Staring at the spectacle before their eyes, the one to whisper that in blank surprise was Julius. However, Subaru's mental state witnessing the scene was absolutely the same as what he had whispered. Then, what scene had they been expecting, was something quite difficult to determine now that if it were to be mentioned. Reed, what's up, you all? Y'all comin' here too, ain't that some enthusiasm? Or, do ya have business not with me, but with this guy? Gluttony, ka. Saying that, Reed scratched the area of his chest with his right hand, and with his other hand the leg of the young boy he had in his grip, the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, he lifted him upside down and made a look of suspicion. Just as mentioned before, what scene they had been expecting was something quite difficult to determine now that if it were to be mentioned, but at the very least, this scene far surpassed what Subaru had assumed. Subaru, I had heard that Reed and Gluttony were negotiating, but Beatrice, negotiating. This, I suppose? Betty thinks that even an exchange would be a lacking expression for this, in fact. Julius, yes, I agree. It is difficult to even call this a conversation. With that, Beatrice and Julius arrived at the same conclusion as what Subaru had whispered. However, the reaction of those two did not make sense from Subaru's perspective. Because the contact between Reed and Gluttony, the one to express it as negotiation from what he had heard last time, had been Julius, who must have witnessed a similar situation. In any case, Subaru, the scene where Gluttony got overwhelmingly whipped down, would that be correct? Though nobody had asked for it, that is what Subaru worded what he witnessed. In the white space of the second layer Electro indeed, the one-on-one battle Gluttony and Reed had engaged in, its traces remained in various spots. They were the crevices on the floor caused by being stepped firmly upon, or the cracks in walls which gave the impression of being caused by slashing strikes. Aside from those, the traces of black burns caused by fires, or the scattered lumps of earth which were not supposed to be here, that precisely made clear the characteristic of Gluttony. It was unmistakable that the departments of all kinds of special moves had been lavish feasts. The departments of those techniques had been struck and smashed to atoms by the calamity known as Reed. Subaru, earthquake, thunder, fire, are all of them Reed. Reed, so what are y'all gonna do, you all? Do you wanna go for the trial? Yet can go for it since you've a slightly nice expression. But, young fish, you can't. Ah, you can't. Julius, why do you say he is an exception? Reed, don't you get it just by taking a look? A guy who ain't perfect or can't even become a game companion instead of being imperfect is just full of holes, ain't that so? Don't stand in front of me when you're like that. I start wantin' to kill you with a single finger, you know. Gluttony, G.I., gugya. While saying that, Reed stabbed his right hand's fingers into the torso of Gluttony whom he had in his grip. With his guts mercilessly gouged, the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony gave rise to an unseemly shriek. Though it was unknown how old Gluttony physically was, even so, from the standpoint of his outward appearance, the young boy of 13 or 14 years of age was being tormented by an adult was the emotion he felt, difficult to suppress upon that sight. It seemed as if Julius also had the identical feeling, and so. Julius, Reed Astrea, you must also be possessing the dignity as a knight. Then, what reason is there for you to torment that young boy any more than necessary? Reed, hey, you, don't you be saying idiotic bullshit. Said Reed without changing the tone of his voice, and declared whilst possessing only the sword spirit similar to penetrating cold in response to Julius, who tried to offer commencing conversation from a fresh start. Reed shook the body of Gluttony left and right whose leg he had grabbed. Reed, the dignity of a swordsman? If you scatter that bout in exaggeration, that's exactly why the thing called the preparedness of a swordsman exists. Are you gonna be fightin' without even the preparedness to die? If you're gonna have an attitude making light of it like that, then there ain't any choice but to teach it to you with pain. The preparedness and dignity of a swordsman, if the argument was to be placed such a sumo ring, the one to be at the inferior position would be Julius. On top of having pride hang outside earlier, Reed's words about preparedness possessed a constant persuasive power. On top of that, though the visible person was painful to even look at. Subaru, if Gluttony collapses, then the result certainly is alright. Though obvious, the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony was not included in his touted objective of everyone's survival. The ones Subaru wanted to save were only Amelia, Beatrice, Rem, Meili, Echidna, Julius, and Shala. On top of that, the two of Patrash and Gan. Gluttony and Reed were not subject to that. If the two of them were to crush each other to call it as that results in an outcome too unilateral, but it was advantageous for Subaru and the others should that happen. However, Reed, first of all, you. Is this guy your buddy? If that's so then it ain't as if I don't get why you're gettin' so heated up. Julius, no, absolutely not. That Sin Archbishop of Gluttony is a bitter enemy of myself as well, an opponent with whom, in the worst case scenario if I were to fight to the extremity, one may end up taking the other's life. Reed, eh? Then why re you gettin' so mad? 'Cause your prey got snatched away? Julius, it is because you are kicking the pride of a swordsman. Julius told the sword saint the man who was the first one to hold that title, bestowed upon only those who stand at the pinnacle of the sword. That declaration of Julius, which couldn't even be an insult, was silently being heard by Reed, who narrowed his eye not covered by the eye patch. Upon the wakeful watch of that sword saint, Julius continued as if slashing the atmosphere. Julius, if battling swordsmen, warriors, knights is something where one must prepare his body for death beforehand, then it is fine to submit to losing one's life at the extremity of the battle. However that, at most, is the extremity of battle, death at the extremity upon the exhaustion of all of one's desperate efforts is how it should be. The victor, absolutely, must not play around with the life of the defeated. Reed, you're saying shit that's making my ears itchy. Who the hell's gonna be listening to all that? Julius, I do not mind should they be named as even inexperienced ideals or sweet nothings. Merely, embodying those ideals and sweet nothings is the way of the knight I believe in. With that bold assertion Julius unsheathed his own knight sword. From what he had heard, this knight's sword had gotten fractured once it was not supposed to be a sword he had a habit of using, hence, it was something suspicious which his hand was yet growing accustomed to. But above all, what must have always been in his fundamental values, those will never waver. That is because they had certainly, always continued to shimmer within his self. That shimmering something did not let Julius overlook Reed's unjustness. Even if the one to fall victim to that unjustness should be a sin archbishop, someone who had committed grave atrocities. Reed, the way of the night, I. Beyond all expectation, that whisper jolted the atmosphere in Electra. That was a quiet tone of voice. That was not a voice harboring emotions of little significance. That was nothing but an echo which seemed as if it had slipped in amongst the other nonchalant and bored echoes. However, that was the signal of eruption of the first-generation sword saint, Reed Astrea. Reed, hey, you. How long ya gonna be sleepin'? Wake the hell up. Gluttony, Googie Tsu. As he groaned in directed strength of grip such that he could crush the grabbed leg with his hand, Gluttony responsively shrieked upon his leg almost being crushed. And Reed looked down onto the upside-down sin archbishop. Reed, you said some interestin' shit, ain't that so? You said you're gonna eat me up, taste me up, lick me up, I will, let you do that. Gluttony. Tsu. What's up with that, Tsu? What's that, what happened so suddenly, Tsu? Why so suddenly, do you feel like that, red-haired Oniasan? Even though you swung we or us around this much, because you were against that, huh? Reed, I changed my mind. Ah, that's right. Removing the distortion of his face caused by pain, Gluttony tried regaining his state of health as Reed glared at him. After that, as if having suddenly noticed something, Reed rotated his neck around. Reed, ones like y'all will be in rootin' right away anyway, ain't that so? Remarkably saying that, Reed stepped ahead diagonally. At that moment, shining violet crystals were thrown into the spot Reed was standing on. A shrill sound as that of shattering glass reverberated, and the violet arrows themselves along with the floor smashed and got scattered about. However, they missed their aim. And Reed, who had been their aim, took a single step and leapt, shortening his distance to Subaru and the others who had commenced that attack just now. Beatrice, Huck. Subaru, not good I suppo. Reed, here. Beatrice's warning rendered fruitless, Gluttony was struck into Subaru's torso, delivering a side blow. Handling a human as a blunt weapon, the unstoppable force mercilessly sent Subaru flying who had been carrying Beatrice. Subaru, Gahawk Hook. Reed, it's good you didn't hesitate, you all. This is way better than that beautiful girl in terms of fightin'. Well, the broken fragments of your ability haven't been reassembled though. With no flexibility to even respond to Reed's brief review, Subaru rolled over while holding Beatrice with all his might. He must not feel as if the origin of his life had been shorn off, with his internal organs overturned by the single blow just now, accompanied with Ram's physical burden. Julius, Subaru. Beatrice Sama. KGH. Hook. And whilst fearing for the blown-away Subaru and Beatrice, Julius, in a single instant piercingly charged towards Reed who had shortened the distance in between. However, Reed strode on and crushed that with his feet and hammered a kick into Julius' abdomen, who had tilted the axis of his legs. Though Julius received that with the handle of the night sword he had instantaneously drawn, he could not block being lunged through by the shock wave as well. With his guts churned by the perforating single blow, he fell back greatly. And meanwhile, Reed, here, try it out and see. To eat me up, or to die just like this by being played around by me, choose one what you'd like or I'd have no choice but to make a move. Ain't that the thing called life, hey you? Gluttony, Tsu. We get it, we do get it, we really get it, we completely get it, as we get it, so we get it, as we want to get it, because we get it. Gluttonous drinking Tsu. Gluttony Tsu. We'll do as per your wish Tsu. It's impossible for us to stay without eating Tsu. Remaining upside down, raising his face right towards the front, Gluttony smiled at Reed. And Gluttony stretched his hand, grabbing the area of Reed's left eye which had been concealed by the eye patch. He subsequently opened his mouth and Gluttony, Reed Astrea. Licking, Gluttony let go of Reed from his hand, as if tearing something off. And, gazing lovingly at his palm where that something was not even present, he exposed his tongue. At the same pace, he chewed that invisible something, and reverberated a slurping sound as if indulging in it. Afterwards, Reed, Abruptly, change arrived in a single instant. As if it had been an illusion or something, Reed's form vanished in the blink of an eye. With the tall figure disappearing from the space it was certainly supposed to be in, Gluttony, whose leg had been grabbed, fell onto the floor. At the same pace, his hands skillfully made a reversal and Gluttony made an agile landing, and looked at his own palm. What was recurring in those eyes was something close to the nothingness, desolateness, dismay of seemingly a gourmet delicacy, which had exhausted its extravagance, disappearing from the top of the platter. Gluttony, ah, so amazing. That kind of flavor, this kind of flavor, which kind of flavor would it be like? We imagined a lot about it, but it was above expectations. Subaru, he ate, read. Gluttony, ah, you saw that, right, Sue? We did eat him. We indeed ate him. Really, isn't it the best? This is the flavor which cannot be imagined, Sue. Even we, who are called something like bizarre eating, are able to get it at this guy's rich taste, Sue. Even without knowing lay say. Leaning backwards, whilst touching own sharp canines, Gluttony praised Reed's flavor. As far as thought could go, it was the worst food report in human history. It halted in between. It was not as if something had barged in as an obstruction. Its origin lay in Gluttony himself. Gluttony, wah? Beatrice, just, what is being started up this time, in fact? Subaru, no, that is. Putting his hands on his own throat and abdomen, Gluttony started making movement as if practicing speech. Though Beatrice found that state to be ominous, Subaru had an idea regarding this abnormality. If the exchange between Reed and Gluttony just a moment ago, if that was what Julius spoke of as negotiation, then. Gluttony, wait, gihi Sue. Strange, it's strange, isn't it strange, Sue? After all, this is. Odd, isn't it? Gluttony, it ain't odd, you. To eat or to be eaten, that's how life works, ain't that so? Strangling his own throat, Gluttony fired words as if answering his own questions. That tone of voice met clear change, and as if pulled into the change of that tone of voice, change ensued in Gluttony's flesh body itself. It was a change as if the waxing and waning of the moon, and the expression of questioning when did it even happen, was appropriate for it. Subaru did not avert his eyes at all. The same went for Beatrice, who was in his chest, and of course Julius, who had taken stance with his sword. However, whilst remaining captured in the field of vision of the three, Gluttony erased that form of his in an instant. And instead, the one standing at the spot where Gluttony had been was. Ah, a fresh body sure's different. It feels like blood's flowin' through flesh. I'm already feelin' hungry. At least come after fillin' your stomach, mentally adult brat. Pronouncing so, the one who had carried out substituting for the former player, having exited the stage known as the Pleiades Watchtower for merely a few 10 seconds, the existence who was blooming a second time at the center of the stage, was Reed. Reed Astrea had stolen the flesh body of the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony and had achieved resurrection into the present world. Julius, this is the result of the negotiations between Reed and Gluttony from Julius' perspective. Of course, the details of the content of the conversation between Reed and Gluttony must have changed due to Subaru and the others' intervention, but it should have approximately remained the same. In other words, Subaru, what the hell's the negotiation, speaking while putting on airs. Beatrice, Subaru, this is not the time to be saying all that, I suppose. Gluttony has disappeared, and Reed has. Subaru directed a rough remark towards Julius' pretentious phrasing the previous time. Within those arms, Beatrice called for further vigilance, but Subaru patted her head lightly and gazed towards Reed. Subaru, strictly speaking, taking a backhand grip onto the authority of Gluttony which reconstructs eaten opponents, and painted out the opponent's self. Is that right? Reed, don't ya go round sayin' tough bullshit. Like I'd know such convenient shit. So, don't swagger about with shit I'd no way in hell know, damn young fish. Young fish? HM? You? You, this, you, that's it, ain't it, you? Though his spirit had hijacked that flesh body, Reed made a wry face unrelated to that truth. He unusually groaned saying HM and gently put a finger in his own eye patch. And turning it over, he looked at Subaru with his healthy blue eye which had no particular need for an eye patch. Looking, gazing, staring. Reed, you're pretty disgustin'. Reed, good job not havin' your head gettin' screwed up with that. No, has it gotten so? What it'll be precisely 'cause it's gotten so, I ain't got any idea. I haven't even given it a thought. What was he saying? Thinking that, Subaru got truly perplexed upon Reed's attitude. On top of being perplexed, the shivering and nausea enveloping his entire body were about to hit the critical point. Though obvious, Ram's inferior physical form was worsening as much Ram's body increased its voltage, and was throwing the backfire of recoil she was originally supposed to have felt into Subaru. This time Subaru had not personally met up with Ram, so there were no means for Ram to find out the reason why her body was favorably working. Thinking of it now, it seemed as if Ram had been concerned regarding Subaru last time as well. Though he had noticed Ram's concern, who was not in this place, only after dying twice. Reed, I see, I do see. I ain't got any idea, but it looks like you're the one these guys for, ain't that so? Then that makes things faster. Julius, Reed. Your opponent is myself. Stepping ahead, Julius fired a slashing strike. But Reed attempted receive that with the chopsticks he had drawn out from his bosom. However, Reed, The slashing strike lightly touched the tip of the chopsticks and blood spouted out of Reed's right hand, despite him wanting to receive it. Looking at that, Reed made a suspicious look. Julius raised his eyebrows in faint surprise as well. And for having witnessed that with his own eyes, that alone was a harvest for Subaru. Reed, TCH. Clicking his tongue, Reed gyrated his chopsticks as if spinning a pen between the gap of his fingers and skillfully repelled Julius' nightsword. At the same pace, stepping ahead with a single stomp, he lapsed the distance between him and Julius, who had instantaneously drawn his body back and aimed his palm towards his abdomen. Reed, your opponent is myself, did you say that? Julius, coo. Reed, no way y'all be gettin' to have an exchange with me, after doin' a princess carry back there. The further twisted sole of the palm burst open Julius' abdomen, the slender tall figure continued bleeding and was blown away backwards. He tried to position his lengthy legs to the floor in order to kill off that vigor, but failing to do so, Julius' body turned upward at the bottom on the floor, and tumbled over at the same pace. And, concluding his battle with Julius, who had widened the distance in between, Reed turned back. Subaru, sure hook. Aiming for that sideward face of Reed's, Subaru fired the whip which was at the back of his waist. However, without the occurrence of a miracle such as his body continuing to remember it, the tip of the whip flew towards the wrong direction. The effect of lost memories was not only in his mind but also affecting the recursive actions of his flesh body. As a result of fully realizing that, Subaru took in a heavy inhale. At the same time as that. Reed, you, with such a boring trick. Beatrice, that boring trick is the recommendation of you getting an end of being buried, in fact. Going past his amazement, Reed expressed his rage, and from his hind echoed the loud sound of striking hands. Upon looking, that had been Beatrice, who had both her hands free, away from Subaru. However, even if their hands were unconnected, there was a certain connection between them. Beatrice extracted an extremely small amount of something like MP from the path of Subaru and exercised great magic. Beatrice, all shamak. The moment immediately after Beatrice's chant had achieved completion, what arose in the space was an enormous black hole. That which had appeared all of a sudden in the air, manifested as an existence accompanied by primordial fear such as its unknown bounds in unknown depths, and tried to swallow Reed, who was right before it. Subaru, that is. At a single glance, it could be understood that it was the great magic in effect within the space. This was more of an issue of imaging it so, rather than having knowledge about it. Subaru had heard of Beatrice being a wasteful spirit, but the intensity of the real great magic could not even be in the same league of comparison. Subaru had been unaware that this was even possible. This was a harvest. That black hole swallowed Reed and repelled away his sword saint off to somewhere unknown. Reed, the hell, it's just air. Something like air's everywhere, as if it had stopped me. With just a single swing of his chopsticks, Reed broke through that immense magic with extreme easiness. A carefree attitude, as if, quite literally, slashing through air. No, for him, it truly was exactly that. He did not have the nature of taking roundabouts around something which he was capable of doing and then boasting about it. He had slashed the air, so that was his explanation. That was all there was to it. Subaru, slashing dimensions, I imagine it as quite a superior ability, you know. Reed, hey, don't you put such cool names on it, better food can be served, you know. If y'all stay persistent just cause things be gotten a bit lively, that won't be amusin' or anything, you know. Swinging his chopsticks at the same angle as when he had slashed Beatrice's magic, the moment immediately afterwards, Subaru's body had been diagonally burst open from his chest to his waist. Subaru, ga, AAA. Beatrice, Subaru. Julius, Subaru hook. Tasting the sensation of scorching heat, Subaru collapsed on the spot, as Beatrice and Julius called for him. Upon the voices of those two, Subaru gnashed his molars and glared at Reed with bloodshot eyes. And, turning his palm towards the two trying to rush up to him, he managed to halt their legs. Subaru, I'm, all right. Shaking his head left and right, he urged the two to not worry for him. Of course, there was no way he could truly convince them simply by conveying such words to the two. The chest wound was shallow. No, it was not shallow. Though it was not shallow, it did not ache. It could be expressed as not being unbearable. At any rate, though it was bitter, it was alright. It was not worthy of making those two experience bitter, painful emotions. Gnashing molars, the blood on the verge of being vomited, nausea? Whichever it was, vomiting must be restrained from. Facing the front, glaring ahead, Reed must be carefully observed. Reed, as if you can reach me with that, you. With a stunned expression, Reed was looking at Subaru, who was bleeding out of his lips. Facing that Reed, Subaru stretched out his hand and raised a single finger. Subaru, why yeah. I will reach you. Even right now. I can reach you. In a place not necessarily here. I will, for sure, save Amelia, Beatrice, Rem, Maylie, Echidna, Julius, Shala, Patrash, Gan. Without failing, a single person. Gluttony and Reed were exceptions. The Natsuki Subaru was not Natsuki Subaru as well. That is why, right now, at this moment. Subaru, this is, count 1. Overlapping with death necessary for a counterattack, was an accomplishment of Natsuki Subaru's as well. At the very end of the end, Reed's blue eyes sheened a dull flash towards Subaru, who had made that declaration. Chapter 72. Fiercely, the enshrouding clouds of sand were trying to enwrap the field of vision. Haran. With his entire body swinging around at the sensation of violently swaying about, Subaru desperately clung on, trying not to be thrown off. Ahead of him, a pigtail was shaking about left and right. Work hard, sand earthworm-chan. In accordance with Meili's call, the sand earthworm trembled its large build and intensely hammered in and struck its face. Being swallowed by that shock wave gave rise to an immense loss in the troops of the advancing horde of witch beasts. However, those lost troops were covered in the matter of a few seconds, trampling upon the scattered corpses of their own kind. The hordes of witch beasts continued to push in without halting their feet. The war situation was unfavorable. Under their eyes, in all directions, advancing in were the innumerable witch beasts. With those as her opponents, Meili made free use of her preparations, which in no way could be stated to be sufficient, and was struggling fiercely. Honestly speaking, Meili's efforts, as she controlled the witch beast, were hard to notice by an outsider's perspective. She ordered instructions to the witch beast, and abiding by that the fiendish monster rampaged about. There was no mystery in that if that alone was to be observed. However, Meili, hook. Looking at her shape, with sweat on her forehead and her occasionally inhaling agonizingly, it could perhaps be understood at a single glance that it was a recognition too difficult to observe. Meili, fa. Enough, Jizo Oniai-san treats people so rudely. Wiping the sweat dripping down her chin by the back of her hand and stating some rather harsh words, Meili's eyes had become bloodshot. It was not as if she had directly linked with the witch beast like Subaru or Leonis, but to bend the atrocious witch beast's instinct as per her own notions, an immense strength of will was needed. For Subaru, who had read her book once and personally experienced her half-death, the weight of that indemnification was clearly known. That is precisely why it had been transmitted to him. That Meili was seriously thinking of capturing the tower, along with Subaru and the rest. Subaru, huck. Meili, hey, Oniai-san. If you don't grab on properly, you'll die, you know. Subaru, I know. The moment immediately after he profoundly thought of those deep emotions, his body felt as if it was being carried away in the horizontal jolts and his posture crumbled. He had momentarily withstood his ground, but he was shouted at by Meili when she discovered that. Whilst complying with those words, Subaru calmed down and clung to the protuberance of the large build. At present, the figures of Subaru and Meili were on top of the large build of the sand earthworm. Meili, if instructions were to be given directly from a close distance, there must be a child which listens to what is said even within children who cannot learn anything, isn't it? Subaru, like I said, I never thought I'd get to have a witch beast ride. Swishing through the air, with his frame being jolted by the velocity of the witch beast's body cutting through the atmosphere with a roar, Subaru skillfully moved around his body weight while stuck in admiration of Meili, who was managing the witch beast's back. This time as well, Meili's battle with the hordes of witch beasts commenced from the balcony of the fourth layer. Making use of several sand earthworms which had been prepared in advance, having the hordes of witch beasts advancing towards the watchtower suffer an attack in order to block the invasion of the witch beasts into the tower was Meili's role. However, she quickly gave up on the attack from the balcony, jumping onto the back of the sand earthworm underneath, and then in one go, plunged into the witch beasts with vigor like that of a high wave, from the middle of its forehead. With that heroic tactic of Meili's, accompanying her as bait was what Subaru's current state was. Meili, really, the witch beast-chans all really love Oniai-san, isn't it? Subaru, and that's nothing to be happy about. Hook. Looking at the excited state of the witch beasts drawing near, Meili sighed as they were crushed by the sand earthworm. Whilst agreeing with her comment, Subaru narrowed his eyes at the hurriedly approaching hordes of witch beasts. Though the principle behind it was unknown, it was something he was aware of in terms of the result. The witch beasts who surrounded the watchtower, strictly speaking, were not aiming for the watchtower but had gathered aiming for Subaru, who was inside of it. That was evident from this situation as well. The spearheads of the witch beasts were concentrating on the extreme towards the sand earthworm, which was giving a ride to Meili and Subaru. Turning their legs around, which were supposed to have been facing towards the tower, hastily making way towards the side with unraveled fangs, was merely the instinct of witch beasts trying to kill a living being, nothing more. Subaru, it wasn't as if I was half convinced, but him having the physical constitution which attracted witch beasts was a peculiarity. Subaru, who had been in present-day Japan till yesterday, did not even need confirmation for as a real feeling. In the past, he had gnawed the pocky for the dog kept in the neighborhood, but could that have possibly been a symptom of the early stage of this physical constitution? He was utterly unaware now. Though he was unaware. Subaru, it seems it's no mistake that I am responsible for a large part of the 5 obstacles. The large hordes of witch beasts advancing towards the watchtower, the ones of gluttony putting his approach toward the tower to test through Subaru's memories, Reed who took in that gluttony and acquired substance, Shala who commenced aiming for Subaru by the virtue of her transformation, the jet black shadow which swallowed the entirety of the watchtower. Looking at it back now, it was impossible to prevent the thought of the responsibility for their origin seemingly coming down onto Subaru in the truest sense. Of course, inevitability was no possible part of it. Subaru, my mind, is getting depressed. However, if the witch beasts, Shala, and the jet black shadow could be lured outside of the watchtower, there may possibly form a way to break out of the deadlock of the present circumstances. Subaru, it is not forbidden to destroy the trials, huh? The 5th rule, behind capturing Pleiades' watchtower. When he thought of the feelings of Shala's, who had hid that, he felt his chest ache, but the rule he had finally fished out of her mouth granted a new viewpoint towards the place known as the Pleiades' watchtower. It was not as if his eyes had opened innovatively by getting to know that rule. However, granted with a scale he had never thought of, his way of looking at the world had expanded remarkably. Things which decay not exist cannot be obtained. That was the fundamental law of the world. To pass over the trial without finishing it, to act contrary to the established routine of the trial, those had been prohibited. Without even getting involved in that, destroying the trial itself had not been prohibited. What could that mean? What could it? Subaru, May. Lee, trying to continue his words on, that is when Subaru witnessed it. By changing the course of the sand earthworm, whilst attempting to confirm whether the terrain of the watchtower's environs were usable or not, the objective came to a standstill. Because an assailing corona, from overhead, had scattered away the thick trunk of the sand earthworm. Hara-an. With more than 8 meters blown off of the approximately 10-meter wide waist, the sand earthworm shrieked, giving rise to its death wail. The precedingly lowering roar of the witch beast also resembled a howl, and Subaru, who had basked in that at close proximity, felt his vision die white with its explosive intrusion into his eardrums. Atop the witch beast, which had experienced that and was disseminating bluish-purple bodily fluids, having failed to stop its body from getting blown off into 1,000 scraps from both the front and back of its trunk, Subaru and Meili's bodies were thrown down. Subaru, ah. Meili, G.H. Hook. Instantaneously stretching out his hand, he took Meili's petite body within his arms. Patting his shoulder and trying to call out to him was a byproduct of it. By reflexively leaning his body forward, he had been able to catch her falling body. However, that had not been a drastic settlement. The sand earthworm's large frame somersaulted, and not only Meili but Subaru had also been thrown off. Even if he were to pull her in the end, they would fall on top of the sand, a place entirely surrounded by witch beasts. Should that happen, the two of them would become feed for the witch beasts whilst they attempted to reorganize themselves. Above all, Subaru, Shala. Clinging to the outer wall of the tower with its tail stinger facing towards Subaru and the rest, the titanic scorpion Shala, with her large build slipped into the twilight, she was distantly visible having made her appearance. They were out of time. Within the tower, someone broke the rule. In accordance with that, Shala lost herself and transformed into the titanic scorpion, and just as what she had reported about herself, she commenced attacking, aiming for Subaru. That single bomb had scattered away the sand earthworm's trunk and mid-air towards Subaru and Meili. Meili, Oni Isa. Hook. Hugging Meili tightly, who was within his arms and had raised a voice as that of a scream, Subaru did not let his eyes avert from the titanic scorpion. No, Shala. The red compound eyes emitted a distinct glow within the presence of night, and the line of sight, unbeknownst to any course of action, clearly understood its aim was Subaru upon looking at him. Light gathered at the tail stinger, and now once again, a corona was fired. They would get vaporized away should they be struck by that. However, they must not get struck by that. He wanted to avoid being killed by Shala, regardless of how much that may abrade away his. If he were to bend away from that notion, he would surely become a miscreant then. However, a way to defend themselves while they were mid-air was Haran. The moment the corona was fired, the sand earthworm, writhing in agony, thrusted itself above the line of fire. Was that simply the instinctive movement of the sand earthworm, or did Meili influence it in some way? He did not know. However, the single blast Shala had fired had been avoided at the moment when it was supposed to have vaporized Subaru away. And Subaru, gug. With vehement vigor, Subaru and the rest fell on top of the sand from their sands. Meili, who was strongly embraced within Subaru's arms, was perhaps safe. However, Subaru himself had not been safe. Unable to defend himself, he had gotten his head within the extensive sand. A dull sound echoed, the joints of his bones, which must be avoided from getting smashed, had gotten broken. At that instant, his field of vision was rendered completely black. His nerves, which must be avoided from getting slashed, had gotten cut 1,000 times. Not only what was visible to his eyes, but sounds, sensations, anything and everything turned distant. Merely his nose remained alive. It was baffling. The nose, which was not even expected to be capable of doing something useful normally. For some reason, till the very end of the end, he could sense scents. The sweet scent. Within his arms, having been there till recently, that sweet scent. Perhaps, yet remaining alive, that sea. Count 7. Escaping outside of the tower, the effectiveness of luring away the witch beasts. The witch beast's aim is Subaru. The aim of the shadow and titanic scorpion as well, is perhaps the same. With Natsuki Subaru alone, Meili cannot be protected. Subaru, go. Enduring the nausea welling up within him, Subaru glanced at the front once again. Stepping firmly, pouring immense strength in the legs, he somehow managed to have his body remain still. His anguish had not been eased. He was merely skillfully deceiving his anguish. Hiya! Hiyoya! Aya! Crushing the bitterness of gastric juices in his teeth was Subaru, and in front of him, fiercely wielding 2 ice swords, was Emilia. Evading those attacks of Emilia's calmly, with a deriding smile, was the bitter enemy he was tired of looking at, Laybat and Kato's. Since the restart point of return by death had been set up to the moment immediately following the confrontation with Louis Arnab in the Book of the Dead, Emilia and Gluttony's encounter was inevitable. At the point in time Subaru had returned by death to, the battle between Emilia and Gluttony had already commenced. The simple way to change situations was to tamper with the matchmaking. However, by activating Sr. Leonis immediately after returning by death, Subaru was able to see the positions of his comrades within the tower, and he naturally understood that this fight was unavoidable. Henceforth, he did not have the situation of the tag team of Emilia and Ram fighting Lei change. However, something could be done about that in its own way. Subaru, Julius. Julius, I know. At Subaru's sharp call, in accordance with that, a single shadow stepped in. That was, with a night sword in his grip and running through the frozen aisle, Julius. Having his light purple hair flutter in the icy wind, he commenced his gallant piercing sprint from a lower posture. Lei ahahatsu. Even the nameless Knight Sama shall be partaking in the battle, ha. Julius, unfortunately, if that was intended to be a provocation, then that is quite weak. Subaru pricks at spots much more painful. Lei, despite being comrades, what's up with that? Brushing away the advancing piercing bolt with his dagger, Lei and Julius exchanged words at close proximity. Even in the midst of that, sword strikes unfolded between the two, and exchanges of special moves, opposite to the content of their conversation, were being performed. Having Julius accompany them to this place was a type of a gamble. When the 5 obstacles had attacked the watchtower for the first time, Subaru had Julius accompany them for going around this as well. At that time, Emilia had gotten her name eaten, and her cooperation with Julius, who had been rendered unknowing to her battle style, had been shoddy and lacked the ability to corner Gluttony. However, Subaru, this time, nobody has forgotten Emilia-chan. On top of that, Emilia and Julius' coordination attempted to soundly counter Lei. At that point, ahead of Subaru's line of sight, was the shadow of a person kicking the ceiling and making a sudden descent, Ram severely cut in between. Of course, increasing her fighting strength through Sr. Leonis was Subaru's greatest duty. That had been practiced this time as well, and Ram advanced closer to Lei's torso with unordinary body handling. And Ram, just kindly take the exit already. Lei, egg. Cold words, and her palm, with equal sharpness, drove into Lei's side. At the palm strike aiming to directly impact the internal organs through the gaps in ribs, and a distinct rumble of pain spilled through Lei's lips. At the same pace, Ram's knee tried assaulting the snapping body, which then got blocked, but grabbing the hair of her opponent from the back of his head, she slammed him onto the floor. On top of that, she consecutively swung down her heel into his face. Merciless might, continuous attacks, those were the only way to drive Lei into certain defeat. However, this had been far from being sufficient for damaging Lei. The heel Ram swung down onto his face, having grabbed that slender ankle whilst lying down. He glared at Ram from below with a bloodstained evil countenance. Lei, ne-sama, caught. Emilia, Haria. Lei, Gatsu. Lei expressed a smile on his evil countenance, and his body, from a directly horizontal attack by the ice hammer given shape to and swung by Emilia like a golf swing, got blown off. It was a nice save, just when he was about to put his wickedness to work by grabbing Ram's leg. At Lei, who went rolling and somersaulting skillfully, Emilia gallantly raised her eyebrows and puffed up her chest. As merciless, as always, I suppose. Beatrice, while supporting his body right by his side, whispered in response to those actions of Emilia's with admiration, amazement, and somewhat pride. The truth is, Subaru felt the same. She had a cute face, she could truly be relied upon. Ram, Emilia-sama, gratitude for the rescue. Emilia, it's fine. Ram got grabbed because she's moving around this much, after all. Julius as well, thank you for coming here. Julius, not at all. Gluttony is an opponent I am deeply connected to as well. Rather, my deepest apologies for exposing Emilia-sama and Miss Ram to danger. This was originally supposed to be a spot where I would tell you to kindly stand back, but Ram, with that as the opponent, there must be no room to be acting upon chivalry or gentlemanliness, isn't it? Whilst hugging her elbows, Ram flatly intercepted Julius' words. Even Julius could not refuse that. It seemed as if he felt ashamed of his feelings towards that itself. There is a certain style to battle, there are certain rules to warriors. However, adhering to that and becoming too obsessed over pride would result in large losses. For Julius, this was a difficult spot. However, there was no choice for him but to respond to it. At the very least, with the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, an atrocious gang, as the enemy. Lei, you sure are doing it. To do this much with us as the opponent is quite something. Saying that, the aforementioned Sin Archbishop stood up while shaking his head. Whether that was him resounding having received Emilia's heroic blow from his shoulder, his right arm was still loosely handing down. Possibly, the shoulder bones had perhaps been fractured. If that was true, then it could be said it was possibly fatal for the authority of Lei Baton Kato's, of reconstructing battle styles through memories. No matter how proficient a battle style may be, it would be rendered meaningless if it was not exercised perfectly. Subaru, or instead, by substituting with the little sister, are you going to be switching the body and everything to the other? Lei. Wahen, we see, ha. Oni-san is aware of our solar eclipse and lunar eclipses, what that means. Well, got seen through, isn't it? But you know. Putting an abrupt halt to his words, Gluttony carefreely stuck his tongue out as if mocking Subaru and the rest. Though Subaru furrowed his eyebrows to that gesture, the answer was provided immediately. That was. Lei, in such a disadvantageous situation, is there any meaning for us to still continue fighting? Subaru, huck. Not good. Obvious logic, Subaru shouted while cursing the shallowness of his own thought. Hearing that call of Subaru's, Emilia and the others also seemingly reached the same thought, but they were too late. Lei, bahahei. Lightly swinging his hand, Lei's figure jumped over the space. Using the odd talent of the leaper, he erased his form from the aisle. Julius, stay on the lookout for the surroundings. We don't know where he may appear from yet. Ram, it is futile. That bunch, once they are allowed to get away, they escape. That must be why, they haven't been caught even once yet, isn't it? Rendering his form invisible was Gluttony. Julius called for vigilance for his surprise attack, but Ram probed into the situation with composure whilst shaking her head left and right. Subaru too felt the same as Ram. Just as the words Lei had left, there lay not a single reason for him to continue fighting in such a disadvantageous situation. Lei Baton Kato's was a Sin Archbishop, not a warrior. He did not possess the qualities of continuing to fight until the very end, or enjoying hard battles either. According to Lewis's statement, what they desired was the greatest life, the itinerary of optimum solutions. The hazards of hard battles or defeat, those could not even be forgotten desires for them. Emilia, then, it's over already? Dumbfounded, Emilia whispered whilst reducing the ice hammer she held in her hand to air. In those words was not the relief of the enemy having disappeared, but the disappointment having let a bitter enemy slip from their hands. No, something differing furthermore, despondency. The reply to that despondency was Ram, just a little bit more and yet. Ram, just a single step more, and the bunch who made Rem go through all that could have been. Hook. Kneeling down, Ram raised a high-pitched voice. She powerfully struck her fist to the aisle's floor, trembling her voice regarding Gluttony, who had artfully succeeded in running away. Everyone in this place was painfully aware of the feelings of her regretful self. The reason why Emilia prevaricated her words, why Julius hid his yellow eyes, why Beatrice, beside Subaru, lowered her shoulders, all of it collected upon that. They had come to possess a sudden clue. However, unlike relying on knowledge of the tower, inquiring Gluttony about the damage dealt by the authority of Gluttony directly was a way that had been thought over with certainty. To have that slip away from right in front of the eyes, it was obvious to feel despondency for that. Subaru, with this, Lay has been repelled away, is that what it would mean? Understanding the feelings of Ram sinking deep into lamentation, Subaru possessed a different kind of doubt. Seeing the disadvantage of 3 against 1, Lay decided to withdraw from this spot. However, speaking in terms of whether he had withdrawn completely as a threat to the watchtower, that was yet unclear. Though Ram had informed Julius of the futility of looking out for a surprise attack, that was something limited to only this place. Within the tower, dangerous Gluttony were wandering around, that situation yet remained unchanged. If so, then it could not possibly be said that one of the 5 obstacles had been eliminated. On the contrary, they had left an opponent about whom they had no idea where he may clash in from, to take care of himself, that was all there was to it. Subaru, Huck, should the guy who escaped be ran after, or should another problem be looked after? At any rate, right now. The thing known as a situation's all about the opponent, where you should be moving round without thinking anything nut. Suddenly, the moment he was giving consideration to the possibility of not making a move, he felt his hair rise at the voice which originated from behind. When everyone turned back instantly, slow footsteps approached from ahead of the aisle. Their owner, as if simply taking a walk without halting a single step, that was not something the aforementioned bunch would do. For some reason. I'm taking a walk round my garden, yet why'd I be worrying about other fellas? Boldly, without feeling shy for a single thing, the man, the figure of Reed, who descended down from the second layer, at that Subaru felt the situation deteriorate further. Keeping the issue of Reed for later, he had hastened Lay Batten Cato's subjugation, but in terms of results, Lay had escaped and obstructing Reed's revival had completely failed. Emilia, since when did this tower become your garden? Reed, hey, don't ya go round having misunderstandings, fiercely frizzlin'. Lemme tell ya, when I said garden I wasn't referin' to this gloomy tower. You, ain't it obvious I'd be callin' the whole damn world's my garden? Julius, if the man who became legend by a single swing of sword says that, then that comment must not be a trifling matter. At the arrival of Reed, who was not supposed to be able to leave the second layer, Emilia and Julius fired their own respective astonishment and words. The response to that was extremely typical of Reed, that could be stated straightforwardly. For this warrior who surpassed all human intellect, the idea of thinking over his footsteps, no, not just footsteps. The thought of taking other people into consideration was completely out of the balance. Ram, WHY, have you descended down here? You were not supposed to be able to leave that floor, isn't that so, trial taker? Reed, talkin' to women knelt down and sunken ain't to my leaking. If you want me to answer, then try requestin'. I don't think strong-hearted women re bad. Though I don't think weak-hearted women re bad either. Ram, is that so? Such a sleazebag. Without expecting a direct response, Ram promptly halted her response to Reed. The next instant, Ram, who had kicked the floor with enough force to burst it open, rushed towards the opposing Reed's bottom in a straight line and turning into a pink whirlwind, leapt towards the sword saint standing bolt upright. At the same pace, making the best use of her petite build, a high-speed rotating kick was fired from her heel towards Reed's head. Without any exaggeration, a kick strike with enough force to mow down his head. It was a stark kick which, if it landed a direct hit, would blow off his head physically, if not that then, at the very least, his consciousness. Of course, the respective recoil would flow into Subaru from Ram and ache like a strike of lightning would bolt through his body. Subaru, goo a hook. It is said that when an artery explodes, it pains to an inconceivable level. Right now, it could be boasted that what was running through Subaru's entire body was something close to that. Ram's attack, which had been unleashed to this extent, the fruits it bore were Reed, not bad. but that's all it's got. Had it been Trisha, she would have broken the floor with a single blow, you know. Ram, monster. Reed, don't lump me together with something like monsters. There's gotta be a limit to how low my worth can be, you know. Intercepting the kicking leg, he had the impact flow into the ground. Having been witnessed earlier, physical attack killing that made the floor and walls of the aisle develop cracks, however, the damage to Reed himself had been blocked perfectly. And, towards Ram's abdomen, who had halted movement. Reed, here, try enduring this, you. Spinning and turning around his body once, Reed's bulky and sturdy leg sprang up. At the same pace, the sole of his foot captured Ram's body and swept it right upwards energetically. Ram, Kafu. With the air within her lungs squeezed out, Ram's lips, as she widened her eyes, vomited a large amount of blood out. Whilst bathing in that without evading it, Reed narrowed his eye unconcealed by the eye patch and distorted his lips. However, immediately opening up his narrowed eye again, he spilled out the hell with his voice. Ram, it was successful, wasn't it? At that instant, Ram grasped the leg caved into her abdomen and, using her entire body, settled the joint of her knee. With an attitude as if unaffected by the impact of the strike which had pierced through her abdomen. Seeing that, Reed carved a puzzled expression. Reed, the heck? You're behind this too, young fish. With a damp voice, he told Subaru, who gnashed his molars at the anguish like a bowling ball had been thrown into the pit of his stomach. Emilia, Huck, no. Don't get any closer to Subaru. Immediately afterwards, Emilia stepped ahead upon observing hazardous emotions levitating across Reed's blue eyes. However, upon her advance, Reed swung his arm in annoyance, purloining the ice sword driven into him, and mercilessly struck Emilia's shoulder with its handle, and energetically kicked her after she fell down. Emilia, Hook. Reed, you're in my way. Receiving the kick, Emilia got physically blown away. Much frighteningly, Reed did that with the leg whose knee was supposed to be captured in grip. In other words, whilst continuing to have Ram cling to his leg, he had kicked and sent Emilia flying. In the end, no matter how much strength Ram may pour in, it could not do anything to Reed's knee. Ram, KGH, his limits know no end. Julius, prepare yourself. Casting aside the advantage of locking him, Ram, like a chess piece, and Julius drew near him alongside. However, the result of the attacks of the two was just as miserable. His kick and his hand being used like a sword shot down Ram and Julius respectively, who were supposed to be at the pinnacle as warriors. Ram had her neck struck, Julius had his leg broken, all of them rendered incapable of standing. Subaru, shit. And, in the aisle where comrades had fallen, Reed approached further, having literally eliminated the obstacles in his way. In front of his eyes was merely the groggy Subaru, who had taken up Emilia and others' damage, and Beatrice, who had spread both of her arms wide as if shielding that Subaru. Subaru, B. It's no use. Beatrice, it doesn't matter if it's no use or if it's absurd, in fact. This is property protection of Subaru. In this case, it is a special field of Betty's, Subaru's partner as well, I suppose. Beatrice's voice of acting strong, right now, echoed far too vainly. Even when trying to respond to that strong spirit of Beatrice's, Subaru's hands, legs, made no reaction to the fighting spirit. What Subaru had taken up was only damage, which seemingly rendered the actions of his comrades futile. 3 of them were merely conscious, that was the fruit their willpower bore. Beatrice, Reed, why are you aiming for Betty and the others? For Subaru, in fact? Reed, 'cause it's in the middle of the trial, saying that'd be a pretty outdated response. My original plan aside, that actually goes for that pretty one. Beatrice, so what, I suppose. Reed, by meeting that one firsthand, my mind changed. It's disgusting, so I'll erase him. A judgment grounded on peculiar sensitivity, conversation could not work against such an opponent. At the same time, with the possibility of him turning over his view wiped out, Beatrice gnashed her pretty molars and glanced at Subaru lying behind, who had crumbled down and had been rendered immobile. The reason why she took a tiny breath was because she resolved her preparedness to fight and protect Subaru. He wanted to tell her to run away. However, what spilled out of Subaru's lips was merely a horse breath. Reed, there ain't any need for you to go out of your way and rush to your death, you know, kid. Beatrice, unfortunately enough, living as if dead is utterly unwelcome at this point. Reed, that's so. Then, there ain't any choice. With his name bearing the expression of a hero and a legend, he would not hurt a girl child. Believing such thoughts to be as though illusions, the glint in Reed's eye remained firm. It seemed to be sentencing as if the one standing in his path was not but an infant. Henceforth, without expecting any benevolence of, Beatrice was the first one to use all her might. Beatrice, all Minya. The emerging countless violet arrows submerged the isle entirely, and completely blocked off any paths for Reed to escape through. To fatally wound with the slightest contact was the special trait of Minya's, fathoming that with a single glance, without flinching whatsoever, Reed curved his lips. Beatrice, Natsuki Subaru's great spirit, Beatrice. Reed, good goin'. Stick swinger, Reed Astria. With the mutual exchange of names, the atmosphere froze. Beatrice, with the violet crystals spread out in the air, and Reed, having picked up Julius Knight's sword that had fallen at his feet, prepared themselves. Until the very end of the end, Subaru was unable to voice anything. However, he kept his eyes open, he never closed them for even an instant. His own decisions and choices, from the results they bore, he had been unable to avert his eyes. He had been unable to avert them. Count 15. Gluttony deserts, upon observing the situation to be visibly unfavorable. Neglected Reed ultimately comes to kill Subaru with absolute certainty. Never again will he let someone die before his own self. Subaru, Beatrice Hook. Wah! What happened, I suppose. Subaru. Subaru. The moment he opened his eyes, he hugged the young girl before him without any forethought. Astonished by the sudden action, the young girl Beatrice stiffened her petite body. It was his reunion with her, who had persisted with tragic preparedness until the previous moment. It turned into relief within his chest, along with unbearable guilt that breathed a painful wind into his. Subaru, Beatrice. He was grateful he was able to meet her again. Along with that, he felt apologetic for having her go through all of that. Beatrice, Subaru? Subaru, no, it's nothing. I do remember. You are Beatrice, I am Natsuki Subaru. You and I are each other's partners, now onwards too, please take care of me, please have fun with me, very good. Beatrice, very good, in fact. Beatrice, perplexed, raised her thumb at Subaru's rhythmic words. It was an expression that must not be existing in this different world, so it must be the result of Subaru poisoning her with it. Patting that head of hers, Subaru took in a deep inhale, and exhaled shortly. Following that, he switched over his consciousness, believing he must grasp the situation. Beatrice, calm down, I suppose, Subaru. Subaru, eh? Beatrice, properly tell what happened, in fact. Did something happen inside the book, I suppose? Were Reed's memories displayed? Betty aside, what about Amelia and everyone? Confirm whether you remember them, in fact. Properly recall all things precious, I suppose. Subaru, that's. Yeah, that's right. Holding both of Subaru's cheeks in her hands, Beatrice brought that to attention. Hearing those words of hers, in front of her hurried self, he fell into slight reflection. It was a phenomenon that might happen to someone who was looping often. For an individual piling up loops, the fresh taste of a happening eventually fades away. With that, experience points gained with people for whom that happening is for the first time and react accordingly slips off, and suddenly people start to appear as not being people. Subaru, I never thought I'd be in that position. In those kinds of works, the mind and body falls into that state due to trials run tens, hundreds or times even more than that. Compared to that, for Subaru it was merely the 15th time. To stop thinking of people as people in nearly 15 times, perhaps it could be said his was turning harsher. Subaru, am I an idiot? No, I am an idiot. Casting away the weak, brittle, pathetic nature of his own, Subaru braced his mind. He had only died 15 times yet, that is all. Without having made any progress, he had merely exhausted his life in indolence. How come did his such self hold any right to proclaim that he was exhausted? Such a thing did not exist for him. It did not. Stand up, raise your face, clench your fists, Natsuki Subaru. There's nobody else except you. Except you. Had it been Natsuki Subaru, such failures never would have. Beatrice, from the very beginning, Subaru has never been some superman capable of doing everything, in fact. Suddenly, Beatrice told Subaru, who had been repeatedly wondering to himself. Subaru inhaled upon that comment and whitened his eyes. Gazing into those black eyes of Subaru straightforwardly, Beatrice shook her head left and right, conceiving grief in her blue eyes. Beatrice, it can be said countless times, I suppose. Subaru is no such superman who can do anything, in fact. Always frantic about what lies in front, gets hurt for everyone's sake. Even enduring pain is not something he is good at, he is a normal boy, I suppose. Subaru, that's not possible. That's not. After all, it should be that way. Beatrice, it should be that way? Subaru, it should be that way, only then can this. He firmly gripped to the pit of his stomach, gritting his molars, thinking back to the wounds of his arm, to the wounds within his body, to his arms which had grown slightly sturdier, to everyone who relied upon Subaru, to Amelia, to Beatrice, to Ram, to Julius, to Echidna, to Meili, to Shala. His guts were rumbling such that it was irritating. They were rashly pushing away, more than the moment of being on the verge of death, but perhaps Subaru's. So you have returned, Natsuki-kun. Did something happen? Geez, Oniai-san, just when I thought you've worried everyone, it's because of that? No fighting with Beatrice-chan now onwards. Disputing with Subaru and Beatrice, no, it was nothing so stern. However, looking at the state of the two facing him, they were Meili and Echidna returning from their patrolling of the library. Neither could he look at the faces of those two straightforwardly. Echidna, Beatrice, did something happen to Natsuki-kun? Was the impact, indeed, too much? Beatrice, it's not as if that's not true, in fact. But Betty and the rest's proper thought was far too lacking for Subaru, who had to experience that misery, I suppose. Echidna, that is. Echidna furrowed her eyebrows at Beatrice, who turned her gaze downwards after staring at Subaru. However, she immediately pulled her chin in, as if having judged the circumstances. Echidna, Shala, who had jumped out, and Julius, who went after her, have not returned. I am also worried about Amelia-san and Ram-san, who went to see Rem-san. I would like to join up with at least either of them, but Beatrice, Echidna, and Meili head to the balcony. In fact, Betty will head to the green room and search for Amelia, I suppose. Stay sufficiently careful, in fact. Meili, that's okay, but what's Oniai-san going to do? At Beatrice's brisk instruction, Echidna and Meili's lines of sight turned towards Subaru. At those gazes, naturally, Subaru wanted to say he would accompany Beatrice, but Beatrice, Subaru, will quietly stay here, I suppose. Subaru, wah. Don't say stupid stuff, Beatrice. I'm alright. My senses may certainly have dulled down after returning from the book, but they'll immediately be in their place. Informed by the standing Beatrice, Subaru reflexively snarled at those words. At the same pace, he poured strength into his legs in order to stand at the same level as them. He poured strength into his legs, but Subaru, ah. Beatrice, be in their place and, what then, in fact? At Beatrice's question, Subaru looked down onto his legs in astonishment. Even if he tried to pour strength somehow, especially into his knees, he was unable to retain balance. No matter what he did, his posture crumbled, and he was unable to stand up. Subaru, why? Beatrice, it's a matter of course, I suppose. Subaru is always working too hard, in fact. Subaru, no, wait, please wait. Everything's somehow working out when I'm at this level, that's. Subaru, that's not possible. I am. Shaking his head left and right in refusal, no matter how many times he tried, the result remained unchanged. Even though he possessed no pain, no anguish, no fatigue, his will did not get conveyed to his limbs. And whilst he remained occupied with that, Beatrice ultimately took a single step in the direction of the staircase. Beatrice, Subaru, Betty, and the rest will cover whatever remains lacking, I suppose. That is why you don't have to think of doing anything and everything all alone, in fact, after all. Subaru, Beatrice. Beatrice, after all, that is Natsuki Subaru, I suppose. Leaving behind a smile for Subaru, who widened his eyes in astonishment, Beatrice dashed. As if equaling her energy, Echidna and Meili also turned their backs towards Subaru. Echidna, Natsuki-kun, I have expectations from you. That you still might be able to give one last push. Meili, I think it's fine if you rest. But it was Oniai-san who said some pretty grand stuff to me, so work hard on that a bit more. Saying all they had to say, the figures of the three disappeared from the library, leaving Subaru behind, whom they had all spoken to. If they were to take the staircase from the third layer, the three will encounter Julius, who must be making his way back around this timing. Or perhaps at this rate, Julius would not come and drag Subaru out, he had embraced that expectation as well. Subaru, no way, he'd come. If Beatrice says all that. He respected that. Much less, the Subaru after returning from the Book of the Dead had been seen by the two of Echidna and Meili. There was no way their kind selves would not relay that. However, that solicitude came at the cost of life. Even though he did not want to see someone among his comrades die before him. Subaru, all because I'm so weak. Because I'm losing my spirit at just this level, why? Had it been the true Natsuki Subaru, he must not have halted his feet by just this. His rage towards his own worthless self gave rise to warmth in Subaru's chest. However, alongside that, a separate feeling was also gushing forth. That was the words Beatrice had left behind. From the very beginning, Subaru has never been some Superman capable of doing everything. In fact, it can be said countless times, I suppose. Subaru is no such Superman who can do anything. In fact, always frantic about what lies in front, gets hurt for everyone's sake. Even enduring pain is not something he is good at. He is a normal boy, I suppose. What Beatrice had recited, the image of the Natsuki Subaru not present here. Despite hearing that, Subaru was unable to believe that. It was difficult to believe in. After all, in accordance with that, that would truly mean he was just a normal human, isn't it? Subaru, something must have happened. That must have changed you, isn't it, Natsuki Subaru? Something like an extravagant meeting with someone. Something like attaining an unbelievable power. Something like experiencing something his current self couldn't even imagine. Because something must have happened, which had allowed him to grow out of being the hopeless Natsuki Subaru. That Natsuki Subaru must have won the faith of everyone in his life in a different world. Subaru, it has to be like that. Without change, beating his legs, Subaru rolled up the sleeves of his clothes. Over there, a sarcoma with its origins not within Subaru's memories had engraved a pattern. Personally experiencing as if taking responsibility for that seeming curse over his body, its root perhaps still remained without changing. That was not possible. That is why Natsuki Subaru was. Subaru, Natsuki Subaru, I summon you. Suddenly, what he had mouthed was the genesis of the suspicion he harbored for this world's Natsuki Subaru. The message for the existence absent here who had, upon times, engraved upon his arm, upon times, composed as if it were a curse and inscribed it on the room. Seemingly finding it to be as if hexing someone who had stolen away the role which originally belonged to himself. Subaru, if you really are within me, then come out now. Gripping his arms powerfully, with strength such that his bones would grate, Subaru called for Natsuki Subaru who was within who was not present here. The existence who could achieve ideals which Subaru, who was present here, could never attain. He asked Natsuki Subaru to come out, if he was here. Subaru, come. Show yourself, Natsuki Subaru. His arms had been lacking, so he latched to his neck with his hands. Of course, the deed of strangling oneself with his own hands, neither was it easy, nor could it be properly done. In the first place, something as convenient as Natsuki Subaru showing his face when his life was in a predicament would never occur. Had that been the trigger, Subaru would have drawn him close 20 times now. Just how many times Natsuki Subaru would have shown his face through that? Subaru, shit. I can't do it. You're needed for this, Natsuki Subaru. Seizing the grasp on his trembling knees, Subaru powerfully struck the floor with his fist. Though his fist pained upon striking the floor of the library of unknown material properties, it could not possibly equal the sense of hopelessness tormenting his chest. He wanted to save them. He truly wanted to save everyone. Nobody was in the wrong. Nobody would mutually hurt each other. He knew that. He could believe, without any wavering, that he could save, that he could love everything. Even though he wanted to save his beloved everyone, he did not possess the power to save them. Subaru, precisely now, is when you are needed, isn't it? And yet, why is it me? My weak, cowardly self, cannot save. And yet, even now, his legs could not move. Due to that, he ended up making Beatrice, Echidna, Meili, those who had not been here, Amelia, Ram, Julius, Shala, face their point of death. Because Subaru had not been able to do anything, they, who had been destined to die, could not be saved. Subaru, Suar Leonis. Whispering weakly, Subaru activated his own authority, in order to be wounded. The power of the little king that dwelled within him immediately reported the positions of his comrades within the tower. On top of that, the reality of them heading to face their own end, of the tower heading to its demise. Distant, having unrolled a violent battle, that light was Amelia. This time, Ram, who was supposed to stay by her side, her light was slightly distanced away two separate lights, Patrash and Aram. She was accompanying them. In the balcony, Shala was struggling fiercely, and perhaps Meili had joined together there with her. Julius and Echidna seemed to be moving together, and Beatrice, acting independently, was heading towards Amelia and the others is what he comprehended. The flow was precisely as Beatrice's instructions, and Subaru's knowledge of the situation. At the same pace, the current circumstance headed towards failure as well. Subaru. With his mind directed by such negative thoughts, Subaru picked up a curious sense of discomfort. As he turned his head towards his hind, Subaru took an extensive look of the enormous library, filled with countless books of the dead Teijita. It was an odd sensation. Unmistakably, it was a sensation he was feeling for the first time. After all, ever since he grew conscious of his authority of Sior Leonis, he had been activating it at this spot after returning by death. Each time after that, Subaru headed for his comrades below, changing the cards he played repeatedly, running about for the sake of changing the situation, ultimately using and exhausting his own life. That is why, activating the authority in Teijita was a matter of course for him. However, after what Beatrice told him, stopping his feet here, a single step distant from the core and getting to overlook the situations within the tower, might have been the origin of this. Thanks to that, what could this have been? Subaru, this response is. Faintly, he could feel it, so dim that it felt as if it was about to disappear. It was distant from his comrades within the tower, however, when compared to being felt with certainty, it was a fleeting, frail sensation, but a sensation that was certainly present there. Pushing himself and having his trembling legs move, Subaru advanced tardily like a caterpillar. After that, he quickly had his body lean onto the bookshelf and elevated his upper body with all his might. Somehow leaning his body weight on the bookshelf, he stood up. And he stretched his hand out to the frail light about to disappear, and grasped it. That grasped light, a single book of the dead, drawing that out. He gulped down a single inhale. A single book, with just the title upon its black binding, a book terribly dull and stale. However, it possessed profound meaning for Subaru. Because Subaru, Natsuki Subaru. Their present was, the book of the dead not supposed to be there. End of chapter 71 and 72, count 1.